Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for joining me on the channel today. I'm Ted Yacucci. Well, I couldn't be more excited because today, on today's program, we are honored to have Peter Janney as our guest. Peter, of course, is the author of Mary's Mosaic, the story of the life and death of Mary Pinochet Meyer. And he comes to us with such a unique perspective because his father really was a very high senior official in the CIA, and a lot of the research that he did in the death of Mary Pinochet Meyer it revealed a lot of information about the CIA's complicity in the death of both President Kennedy and of Mary Pinochet's death. So really, really an incredible book. One of the two or three books that I always recommend people to read when you want to understand the JFK assassination. Again, that's Mary's Mosaic. So, thank you so much, Peter, for joining us on the channel today. I'm absolutely amazed at your academic background and your your wide range of interests. When I just kind of was doing a little bit of research and I noticed that you went to Princeton University. You did your senior thesis under Martin Duberman, a very famous historian, actor, activist,
Yes.
author. Um, you majored in history and psychology at Princeton, if I have it right. You
Yes.
studied after at the Berkeley School of Music in Boston. You studied jazz. Um, then you progressed from there to receive your doctorate at Boston University. Worked as, of course, a psychologist for many years. Um, Very active in the healthcare management field. You actually went back and got an MBA from Duke University. That's incredible, your academic background. Were you always that interested in a wide range of interest as you went along, or was that just something that kind of evolved as your career went along?
Well, in high school, I went to a New England boarding school. I was a terrible student up until the end of the 10th grade.
Really?
And, and when I came back for my junior year, the 11th grade, I decided that I was just going to pull out all the stops and find out what I was made of,
Mm.
which I did. And I went to the top of my class. Um, my father was an alumnus of Princeton. That helped. I had other contributing factors that I think helped me get an admission to Princeton. But, while I was at Princeton, that was really uh, just a profound experience for me. Not only just learning, but going to college in the late 1960s when so many cultural revolutions were taking place. And I was able to just develop an extraordinary relationship with my thesis advisor, Martin Duberman, who I still in touch with until this day. I mean, this guy's 94 years old and he's still publishing books. Yeah, I mean, he's an incredible human being and, just an extremely gifted historian, from a number of different perspectives. So my point is that, you know, the boys and girls upstairs were watching over me and helping me. And it was no accident, Ted, that I was born into the family that I was born into that allowed me to have a relationship with Mary Meyer's family. I mean, I was best friends with her middle child. I was devastated when he was hit by a car when we were 9 years old and he was killed. It really profoundly upset me. But I, managed to stay in touch with the family and particularly with her.
Mm.
And when she was killed the year after JFK's assassination, that was another point of just real devastation in terms of that having taken place. But I had not even begun to unravel the deeper dimension of this event in terms of my father's participation in her death, and the CIA's overall involvement in JFK's assassination. I knew James Angleton. I dated his daughter for a while, Truffy. I was born into the thick of it,
Right.
uh, and really not knowing I was in the thick of it until much later in life,
Sure.
where I just really, in my role as a psychologist, I knew I needed as much help as I could find to begin to make sense of all this in such a way that it would not take me down, but
Right.
I could learn how to use it to get to wherever it is I needed to go. And where I needed to go was to really unravel Mary Meyer's story and be able to tell it in such a way where people would begin to understand, would people would begin to understand the importance of her life and what had happened to her.
Right. And that is really one of the key factors that you bring up so expertly in your book, Mary's Mosaic. Just the fact that a lot of people don't realize the intimacy of the families that were not only involved, part of the CIA and the intelligence world, but also the media world. There were so many people that, and especially through the CIA program Operation Mockingbird, which was very, very successful in incorporating media assets into portraying the CIA's message the way they wanted it to be portrayed. So some people don't really understand that it really was a kind of a an amalgamation of families and social settings that families like yours grew up around and within in the Georgetown, kind of Washington D.C. area. Is that right?
Yes, that I think you stated that very well.
Thank you. So now like you said, you were best friends with Mary Pinochet's brother, uh,
Son,
son. I'm sorry, son growing up. And when was it that you actually decided that you wanted to write a book about her life and her death on a towpath along the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal and all the intricacies that surrounded that? Did you realize right at the beginning that there may be some CIA complicity in her murder, or was it just the fact that you were knew the family so well and were interested in it kind of from that aspect?
the way this unraveled was I really used my knowledge as a psychologist on myself. And I knew, uh, I can't remember, I'm trying to figure out a date here, but, after Mary was murdered in 64, it took a number of years for me to really begin to understand the ramifications of not only her death, but my connection to it. And during that time, I was really a profound student of metaphysics. I studied with for like 10 years with a very well-known MD who had abandoned traditional medicine and became much more of a naturopath. using herbs, vitamins, other food supplements to heal the human body, as opposed to drugs, that kind of thing. And so this guy was just a very extremely gifted medical clairvoyant. And I was so intrigued by his skills that I just begged him to take me on as a student, which he finally did.
Hmm.
And so he was in California, I was in Massachusetts. Every summer, I would go out to California for 10 days, 2 weeks, and just sit with him several hours a day and begin to assimilate anything and everything he could show me or teach me.
Hmm.
So given what he gave me in terms of skills, I began to really realize that I had some real skill at being able to do more and more of what he was doing. And it was really one of the bigger professional thrills of my life, which I still do today. I have people in Europe that will just call me up or contact me out of the blue. And they said, look, I heard about you. I've got this condition. I don't know what's going on, da, 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 da. And I can pretty much within an hour, by of asking them a few questions, tell them how to get out of the jam that they're in.
Wow.
And, there's one story where this woman that I helped heal, she went to her nurse practitioner and said, look, I think I have, an infection in my inner ear, da, 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 da. And the nurse, examined her and said, yeah, you do. How did you know all this? And she said, well, there's this kook in Boston that I called, and he told me. So, it's kind of like one thing like that, one thing after another like that. And, I just continue to build from time to time on what I can do and what I can share.
Right. Well, your efforts in writing Mary's Mosaic weren't minimal. I mean, it took, if I'm correct, it took like a decade of research and work to get through what you needed to get through and to discover. And a lot of that really was some really interesting aspects of your father and his work in the CIA. And he had been a member of the CIA almost since the inception, if I'm correct, there back in 47. So tell me a little bit about that. I mean, what was it like to realize, and we do so much work on my channel in the discovery of the role of people in the CIA surrounding not just the JFK assassination, but world events, and so it's very interesting to me to kind of just kind of get a little bit of a feel for how you felt when you realized that, wow, my father may have been involved in some of these surroundings around not just the JFK assassination, but maybe even the murder of Mary Pinochet.
Well, don't forget that my mother and Mary Pinochet Meyer went to college together.
Right.
Okay. And my father and Mary's husband, Cord Meyer, were very close friends. I mean, they were like bosom buddies. So our families socialized together. I mean, we were the only family in Washington that had this huge swimming pool in our backyard,
Hmm.
which was very, very popular in the summer of, the heat in Washington, D.C. during the summertime. So there were enough, those kinds of factors really blended in. But, I would say one of the biggest things was I I was in and out of psychotherapy a lot. I was in childhood psychoanalysis when I was much younger, and I was no stranger to what mental health healing could do. But the biggest factor in all of this was my involvement in psychedelics.
Mm,
Psychedelics played an extremely important role in my life growing up. And these substances, as far as I was concerned, they weren't anything to play with. They were true sacraments.
hmm
And if they were used responsibly and wisely, they could be profound tools of human transformation.
mm,
And I regarded them as such. So the combination of being, particularly in one of my forages into psychotherapy with this woman therapist that I found, who really understood what I was doing, just helped me to bring this all together, and not let it overwhelm me or paralyze me, but to really get a handle on it. And of course, use psychedelics in the way that I did when I was going on an excursion of one kind or another. Inevitably, Mary would show up and start talking to me. And this was not psychobabble. I mean, she was really there.
wow.
But then she would bring JFK with her. So
Mm,
I would have the benefit of being able to sit there and talk, communicate to both of them. And the immensity of what this allowed me to integrate over time was just incredible.
mm,
And that's really what gave me the province and power of being able to write this book,
mm,
because I had during college, this relationship with Martin Dumoulin and his work. I saw what it took to do good research,
yeah.
and my relationship with Professor Duberman was really helping me organize, how to do a thoughtful examination of any topic that
Mm.
you were going to write about. So I was very fortunate that I had the tools and I was able to use those tools to create and manifest what I did.
I found it really interesting that you mentioned that the way that you found out about Mary Pinochet Meyer's death was when you came back from college and
Boarding school.
boarding school. I'm sorry, that's right, before college. Tell a little bit about that story, if you wouldn't mind.
Well, I came home. This would have been uh, 1964. I came home for Thanksgiving vacation. And the night before Thanksgiving, we were sitting around the dinner table, and my mother just pulled out of the blue the reality that several weeks earlier, Mary had been shot and killed
Mm.
on the Chesapeake and Ohio towpath in Georgetown. And, I my jaw just dropped. I remember excusing myself from the table and going back to my room and just shutting the door and just shivering,
Right.
not knowing what to make of this, going through crying jags of one kind or another. I mean, this was just extremely upsetting to me. And the interesting thing is that at that dinner, my father didn't say a thing.
Yeah.
He just stared vacantly off into space. And it was years before I realized what his behavior was really camouflaging at that point,
Right.
which was his involvement.
And you think that he actually was the person, your father, Wistar Janney, was the person that actually made some calls early after on the day of the murder of Mary Pinochet, that he actually, you think he was the person that made some calls to reveal that death, even before perhaps it was established that it was Mary's body that was found on that towpath. Is that correct?
Pretty much. I can't remember all the little specific little details, but it was very clear to me that, while he may not have been directly involved in scheduling or creating Mary's death, that with a little bit of research on his own, which probably consisted of one or two phone calls, he put two and two together very, very quickly.
Yeah.
And, there were always these little snickerings and jokes about who James Jesus Angleton was
Right.
at the dinner table. I had only hung out with him once or twice just because, he was the godfather of all the Meyer children.
Right.
And, he was into fishing. Michael and I were into fishing. And I remember him taking us down to the Potomac River at one point, and we would snag herring with a certain kind of hook that we used. And, I mean, we were just CIA brats, not really understanding what that really meant at the
Sure.
time.
One of the characters that is I find most interesting in your book Mary's Mosaic is Lieutenant William Mitchell, who you discovered actually came forth the day after Mary Pinochet Meyer's death and portrayed himself as a witness, possible witness to what had happened, and the fact that he said that he had been running along that towpath also, had passed Mary and had passed someone that may have been Ray Crump, the kind of patsy in the case. Tell me a little bit about how that discovery kind of evolved when you found out about Lieutenant William Mitchell and kind of how you kind of tracked him down and all that went into that because it's such an interesting part of the story.
Well, in order to really understand the full story and all the integral parts of it, I had to know who the characters were.
Right.
And, Mitchell was a particularly conspicuous character given his position that day. And so it was increasingly clear to me that Mitchell was not the assassin, that the operation itself was just too well orchestrated for Mitchell to have been out in the open where he could be framed as the assassin because he wasn't. It was, I mean, you don't know who CIA assassins are. They come in, they do their work, and then they disappear as quickly as they appeared before. So I decided, just because I was, at my wit's end, that the only way to get more information was to go after Mitchell. So I scared the shit out of him because I sued him. I just decided I am going to go at this guy hammer and tong. Let's see what happens
Right.
when I do. And I had this really aggressive attorney, William Pepper, who was a big Whig attorney at that time, given his involvement with the Martin Luther King case. So, I got Mitchell to, I ended up saying that I would drop the lawsuit if he would show up for a deposition. And on the basis of that, I agreed that there would be no more lawsuit, no matter what he said, you know, at the deposition. What Mitchell did not count on was how well prepared I would be for that deposition, because I knew every little detail,
Right.
and I would not let him squirm out of anything. I was going to make his life miserable, and it was all going to be on tape and recorded. And, he could lie if he wanted to, but he was going to look like an utter fool if he did. And so, that was a whole event in and of itself in the caper around Mary Pinochet Meyer that just really got me even more excited about understanding the overall complexity of how this had happened and what were the actual dynamics that took place for her to be assassinated.
And you bring up, I just found it incredible because you were the first person to uh, actually research what this guy, William Mitchell, had stated in court at the trial of Ray Crump, where he said he was a teacher, a math teacher at Georgetown University, and some other elements of his biography. And a lot of these turned out not to necessarily be true. And
Right.
you also reveal that was kind of a common cover that CIA operatives would say that they were a teacher at Georgetown University. That's an amazing discovery, Peter.
Yeah, and it was at the time, I mean, it really demonstrates to anyone who wants to understand this this caper, the dynamics of what our own intelligence establishment would do to
Right,
get away with anything that they wanted to get away with.
right. And part of that, and this is, I believe this is maybe one of the most important elements that you bring out in your book, and also other people, wonderful authors like James Douglas and others with his JFK and the Unspeakable. You guys who did the deep delving, bring out to us that the way that people got ahead in the top echelons of the CIA because of the lack of oversight that they experienced was really just the end results. So it almost became an environment where the worst of the worst, as far as morality, those people really were kind of able to um, ascend to the top, and that's how they got away with a lot of this stuff. Do I kind of have that right?
Yeah, you've got it very well outlined. I mean, the chicanery of what I mean, these guys were untouchable, as you can obviously see. It's like they could get away with anything. I mean, they got away with assassinating a president.
They-
What's the big deal about his girlfriend? Let's get rid of her too if we need to. No
yeah,
one's going to touch us,
yeah.
and for a long time, that was the way that things worked in Washington with these people.
Wow. We have now, I mean, as far as the JFK assassination, some of the things that may come out, like William K. Harvey's travel records, where to Dallas in the first couple of weeks in November 1963. Um, if some of those things do indeed get released, I think it's going to be more and more obvious to people who are just on the tangents of the assassination as far as what most people know. But I think it's going to become increasingly obvious that it wasn't just complicity in the JFK assassination or the Mary Pinochet assassination. It was really in my opinion, it was really the origination of those murders that took place within the CIA. Now, of course, there's other factors involved, but I believe with all my heart and soul that it was the CIA that really were responsible, the Angletons and the Dulleses and that top echelon that actually pulled off a coup d'etat in America in November of 1963. What do you say to, I mean, how do you feel about that statement?
I think it's 100% accurate. I mean, the real honcho leader here was Alan Dulles. I
Yeah.
never got to meet him, but he recruited my father, he recruited Cord Meyer, he recruited a lot of the people who went to the top of the agency in one form or another. And they were all these Ivy League, ruling class kinds of men who came from extraordinarily well-endowed families. And that's the way Allen Dulles wanted the country to be. He didn't want blacks or Puerto Ricans or people of color being able to be assimilated. He wanted, the white ruling class men of America to carry the torch into the future forever and ever.
And I think that the whole history could have been, I mean, just from the little bit that I know, but the whole history of the CIA during the 50s and early 60s, I think it would have been a lot different if people like Alan Dulles and James Angleton and others had some basic morality. And I mean, I think that to me, it just seems like they're need to just have the end result over everything else, just provided an environment that was incredibly immoral in the sense that almost anything went as long as it fit their conception of the way things should be.
Yes. No, that's absolutely accurate.
Man, it's just
I mean, there's the quote uh, at the beginning of one of my chapters. I think it's the second chapter from E. Howard Hunt's son. And the quote was, he was perfect for the CIA. He never felt guilt about anything.
right, right. It just amazes me because, the first thing that people say when they look at the JFK assassination is that, well, there could never have been a conspiracy. People could never have kept a secret that long. And then when you actually start to research it, you realize that, my goodness, this was just one um, operation of a ton of operations where Patrice Lumumba of the Congo and even to the killing of the U.S. The UN head I'm
Dag Hammarskjöld, yeah,
Hammarskjöld, where he went to actually was going to the Congo to try to do research about it, and his plane crashed. I mean,
right.
it was they were uh, just basically. The only thing I can say is just totally out of control. I bring up a lot the fact that National Security Action Memo 263, which would, of course, taken 1,000 advisors out of Vietnam by the end of 1963, and then pretty much most Americans out of Vietnam by 1965. That was reversed by NASAM 273, just 4 days after the assassination of President Kennedy, basically guaranteeing the Vietnam War. I mean, how can anyone look at that and say that wasn't a prime motivation for the assassination? There were a lot of people that were going to make an awful lot of money on the Vietnam War. And, I think we had a lot of CIA, the Dulleses and the Angletons and all the rest of them uh, who were basically just so intertwined with American defense industrialists that was the decision that was going to be made. And then they had the anti-Castro Cuban paramilitary groups that had already been training in Miami with Alpha 66 and the student directorates, and of course in New Orleans at Lake Pontchartrain. And it was just easy to make that turn into assassinating Fidel Castro to assassinating John Kennedy. And the only people that could have facilitated that was the CIA. I mean, that's what it seems to me.
Well, I think we should at this juncture also mention Oliver Stone
Yeah.
because his film JFK, I think, was just a bombshell. I mean, that film has really catalyzed so much in terms of people's demand for revelation
Right.
as to what actually happened. And we owe him a huge debt. His courage was just monumental in being able to pull that film off.
It really was. And I don't think that he gets the credit for it. I really don't. And when you look at what happened, how many people came after Oliver Stone to say, oh, this wasn't exactly right or that? I thought that movie, after researching this thing for 40 years, I thought that movie was, first of all, incredibly accurate. And if you look at what happened to Oliver Stone, it was very similar to what happened to Jim Garrison in New Orleans when he was trying to bring Clay Shaw to justice, and not just And when you look at what happened there were 10 plus agents from intelligence, FBI especially, that actually infiltrated Jim Garrison's investigation in order to try to squash it.
That's right.
And the same thing, I think, happened to Oliver Stone. I mean, there was a concerted effort, in my opinion, to just basically go after him when he should have been considered a great American hero for what he had done, in my opinion.
And mine, I mean, one of the you know, bigger thrills I had in this whole escapade is, he invited me out, to meet with him. And, I was able to sit with him for quite a bit of time, where we got to talk just a lot. And I got to know him a little bit. And I just went away feeling, holy shit. I mean, what this guy has done is just really incredible.
Wow.
And I think he has gotten some credit. I think he's going to get a lot more
Yeah,
as
yeah,
we continue to unravel this once and for all, because the genie is out of the bottle now. I
right,
mean, you're not, it's like what's going on with the Epstein files now.
right.
People want to know the truth, and they are not going to take no for an answer. And they are going to call out the goons who keep trying to push this aside and not allow this to happen. So I'm
Absolutely.
optimistic today as we sit here, that these kinds of stories and particularly these kinds of historical events are going to receive their due in the coming months and years ahead.
I'm so happy to hear you say that because, bottom line with me is I feel the exact same way. I believe that, I mean, we've lived through a dark time, you and I, at our ages, because of this cover up. But, in a lot of ways, I think it's necessary in order to get to the light. And I think that if the truth of some of these things ever come out, really, then I think that can only lead to a much greater oversight of not just intelligence agencies, but other governmental institutions. And I think that, I think we have to get to a point of massive campaign finance reform in this country so that we don't sell our, so that people are actually elected and then work for the people that elected them. Of course, not the way it is now. So I think that some of the outcomes. Of a discovery of exactly what happened in the JFK assassination may ultimately help lead to um, some of those evolutions. So I'm hoping. Let me get for a minute to another aspect of the JFK assassination, and that is what happened to the Zapruder film. Um, from the time that Abraham Zapruder took that film, went home, looked at it the next night, the next morning on Saturday, he showed it to representatives from Life magazine, and also two representatives from the Secret Service. You've done a ton of work, including interviewing a man named Dino Brugione, who worked at the National Photographic
Interpretation Center.
Interpretation Center. And you, along with Bart Camp and other wonderful researchers, have really advanced that story. And tell us a little bit, if you would, about just a little bit about the evolution of what got you interested in that, and maybe some of what your conclusions are about the Zapruder film and how that was handled.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because, you know, being the CIA brat that I was, that's what allowed me to go to someone like Dino Brugione and introduce myself, who would take my overture seriously.
Mm,
And so, you know, when I got in touch with him, I realized, holy shit, this
right.
guy is a gold mine, and this has got to be milked for everything that it's worth. Now, I was just at that point starting my relationship with this guy, Douglas Horn,
Mm,
at that point. And I turned to Doug and I said, Doug, you know, this this guy Dino is someone we need to go after. And I was the one that put up the money and the resources for Doug to begin a lengthy interview process that
ah,
was filmed with Dino, where he began to really tell all the little tidbits of information uh, around what he witnessed during that time. And of course, you know, those interviews are now, you know, primary historic documents of one kind or another, you know, in this subject.
yeah, and just to let people know who if you haven't had a if you don't know who we're talking about, this was a man who was really of impeccable reputation, and what he tells is a story of two Secret Service agents coming to him on Saturday night, the day after the assassination, really with the original Zapruder film. They sat down and watched it. And he goes into detail in those interviews that Peter just talked about with Doug Horn. And he tells the fact that what they saw and what they worked all night that Saturday night in doing, which was putting together presentation boards. And what that just means is blowing up certain frames of the film so that they could be presented to Congress or whoever needed to see them. So they went through this whole process, and he named some very specific differences in the Zapruder film that they saw versus what's now portrayed, and that some of those would have been a very much inflated, expanded amount of cranial material, head material from the shot that went 3 or 4 feet into the air. That
Right.
extended over several frames, not just the one frame that's seen now. Also, differences that the limousine, the presidential limousine, actually came to a complete stop. They noticed there were some other things that are escaping me now, and then what happened was, so that was what he always thought was that his work was done there. Well, what happened was that film. There's a very good argument that it was taken to Rochester, New York. The CIA, it was called Rochester Works, I guess, and um,
Hawkeye plant, the
that's right.
Hawkeye plant.
Yeah, the Hawkeye plant. That's right. And at Hawkeye, they make the argument that there was, at least for what was possible in 1963, there was alterations done to the film, and that included the blackout of the back of JFK's head when the shot hit. Anyway, that film came back, and a new crew was kind of called in on Sunday, and they put together entirely new presentation boards. So they were of the altered Zapruder film, and that is basically what we're seeing now. Not the true Zapruder film, but the Zapruder film that would go along with the lone nut Lee Oswald single shot theory. So,
Yes.
so again, that just it seems to be to me like who would have the authority, of course, to do that? Well, it's not just the CIA. James Rowley, who had just 3 weeks before the assassination of John Kennedy, had done an incredible job of bottling up the Chicago plot, an actual plot to kill President Kennedy on the streets of Chicago with another patsy, a guy named Thomas Valley. And he had done everything, even to the point of having his agents, Secret Service agents, not write written reports, but just give oral reports and submitted to Maurice Martineau, who was the Secret Service agent in charge in Chicago, and then he bottled that up. So there were Secret Service agents in Dallas that were not even aware that just 3 weeks before there was an assassination attempt on President Kennedy. And it just happened to be on November 2nd, the same day that the Diem brothers were kidnapped and killed in South Vietnam. So this whole coup d'etat was all planned on one day there. And then because that wasn't successful, and he was able to get through his Florida trip, and then of course to Dallas, where they made sure that they got him. So if you haven't seen these interviews with Dino Brugione, done by Douglas Horn, and as we just heard, financed and facilitated by Peter, you've got to watch these things. And I've done a video on it, so hopefully you can, at least get some background if you watch that video. But it just becomes. To me increasingly clear that if you take the time just to do a minimal amount of research or study about these processes, you have to conclude that there's nobody that could pull these off other than the very top echelons of intelligence and politicians in this country. Sorry to go off on a rant there, Peter, but
But I think what you're saying is really masterful because you are, seducing the public into realizing, you know, you really need to watch this. You really need to wake up and see how entrenched this process was for all this stuff to go off like clockwork,
right,
because it was extremely well rehearsed
right.
in order to be pulled off in the way that it was. And that's why, these talks that you give online with your work, I think are some of the best that I've ever seen in
Oh,
terms of just
thank
really allowing people to begin to easily grasp what has taken place here because it really is just incredible.
that's very kind of you. Well, let me ask you, what are you working on now? What's kind of captured your interest?
Well, I'm trying to sort of finish what I started, and there are two films in the works. One a documentary about the book and what went in to write it, and then there's a bio series being planned. It's going to be picked up on the Apple platform.
Oh,
Uh,
wow. Congrats.
yeah,
That's so cool.
George DiCaprio, Leo's father, is leading the charge on that. And he is very close friends with this producer I've been working with for the last couple of years. His name is David Womark, very well known, wonderful man. And I'm hoping that when the time comes, George is going to seduce his son into playing the role of JFK in the bio series because
Wow.
that's what is really needed here, a certain amount of star power to get this story out into the open the way that it needs to take place.
One question that I know a lot of the folks on my channel will want me to ask you is, did you ever feel physically threatened yourself as you went through this research and it became aware that you were going to put out your book, Mary's Mosaic? Did you ever get any threats or did you ever feel any pressure? Well, you obviously felt pressure, I'm sure, but did you ever get any physical threats or anything like that?
I'm glad you asked that question because, there have been moments where I've let it be known that there was a period of time where I would go to bed at night in abject fear and
Wow,
just shiver in bed because of my fright and fear of what could happen to me.
sure.
And I just, you know, asked for assistance from above. Look, I got to be able to manage this. You've got to help me with this.
Mm.
I need to, I'm not going to cave. I refuse to cave on this. It's too important. And I think by the grace of God or, whatever deity you want to worship, I was given a certain amount of support. I certainly felt like I was that allowed me to get through some very, very difficult, frightening moments in
Wow.
terms of what I was up against. But I never got overtly threatened. And I don't think that was any accident because that could have backfired
Right.
in terms of just bringing all these skeletons out of the closet even more quickly. So, I just was fortunate that I found what I needed to. I found good people to give me the assistance and help that I needed.
Wow, that's amazing. And you make a great point. You know better than anyone that uh, you probably wouldn't have been overtly threatened. It's that's not the way it really works. If they wanted you out of the picture, unfortunately, it's secrecy, and people just kind of disappear, one way or another, and that's happened over the years. And unfortunately, it's happened to a lot of people surrounding the whole JFK assassination. And I believe that's one of the reasons that some of the records are still withheld as stringently as they are, is because
Yes.
that will lead to a lot of other revelations about all the people who were in fact murdered. And there's no other way I think we can say it, in the process of cover up over the decades that we've had. It's just absolutely amazing,
Well,
and
let me just say, in terms of another little vignette, my dad was a drinker. He was not a fall down drunk or alcoholic, but he drank. And there are times you could get him to talk when he'd had a little too much to drink,
Mm,
and he would say things that he probably never should have.
sure.
And so, I remember one time, I was asking him about some guy and the fate that he made. And I said, well, so how did you do this? What would you do? And he just nonchalantly said, "Oh, we take him out on a rowboat and shoot him, and dump him overboard." And he was being totally honest. I mean,
Yeah,
that's I think what happened in at least one or two
yeah,
situations.
yeah, yeah. I mean, you look at what was happening with MK Ultra, and you look at who was it that went out the window? I can't remember his name, but one of the um, CIA operatives that were very involved in MK Ultra was, they were worried about what he may reveal, and he brought in and actually given LSD, and then actually went out a window that they were
Right.
trying to say was a suicide when it was obviously a murder. So a lot of stuff going on. I mean, they went to the extent of bringing George Joanides out of retirement in order to facilitate his being a liaison to congressional inquiries in the mid and late 70s in order to help cover up a lot of the stuff that was going on with especially the Miami group in
Right.
the CIA. So, the more you do some research, then the more you realize that anyone, again, this is my opinion, but anyone that is still trying to get people, Americans, to believe that there could have been any way that it was a lone nut shooter named Lee Oswald, and that whole scenario is just to the point of fairy tale ridiculousness now. And I don't know if you know, Peter, but I had about 3 months where I was interfacing with Ruth Paine, and I was trying to get her to actually sit down for an extended video series where I would ask her what I thought were a lot of questions that she needed to actually answer. And she tried to qualify me as we went along with our phone calls and our email correspondence. And it finally got to the point where her litmus test was the General Walker shooting case, and she asked me straight out if I believed that Lee Oswald was involved, and I told her no, that I definitely didn't, and gave her my reasoning, and that's when she got upset with me and kind of cut me off. But during the period of our interfaces, especially in our email correspondence, she would bring up people like Max Holland, and I don't. He's not here to defend himself, so I won't. I don't want to say much. But she would bring up people that she would say she was very, very pleased with and was waiting for his book to come out. And to me, it seemed like it was obvious that this woman was a CIA operative, an asset, and she was now promoting other CIA assets or CIA attempts to keep this baloney going. And that
Right.
anybody that wasn't qualified by Ruth up front would never really get to do a serious interview with her because she thought she was the smartest person in the room, and she thought she would just qualify people forever and just take interviews from people she knew she could control. To me, that's the definition of a good CIA operative. I
Yes.
think she played her role wonderfully until her recent death. Just my opinion.
Well, it's a valid opinion. I mean, based again, Ted, based on the work that you have done and how you have brought this together into the public domain, you know, it's just for me, having, of course, been involved with this subject matter for like 30 plus years or whatever, you really bring a refreshing perspective
Yeah.
that allows people to open themselves to the possibilities that you are explicating. And it's not a seduction, it's you are dangling the truth, a dimension of the truth in front of everybody's eyes. And the people who are truly truth hungry, that's what I think, you know, is so powerful about what you're doing.
You're very kind, and I really appreciate that very much. Um, Peter, is there anything that we haven't talked about today that you want to anything that we haven't talked about that you want to?
Um, I, I mean, I think I think the most important thing to say is that that my involvement and what I did and what I manifested was not some quirk of fate. I signed up for this before I came into this life. I really believe that. I mean, I couldn't prove it, of course, but just given all the work that I've done with myself, and as I said earlier, the profound power of psychedelics when they're used responsibly, I think are one of the most important transformational tools people can have on this planet.
Mm.
And I just wish there was, so much more work being done uh, with that dimension, and I think it will continue.
Wow. Unbelievable. Well, thank you so much, first of all, for being with me today, and best of luck with your documentaries and your other work that's going forward. Everything that you put out is exquisite, in my opinion. I always tell people the three books you have to read about the JFK assassination are Mary's Mosaic by Peter Janney, The Devil's Chessboard by David Talbot, and of course, JFK and the Unspeakable by James Douglas. These three guys here, if you don't look at anybody else, read those three books and you'll know everything you need to know. I promise you. Peter, let's stay in touch if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
And please update us anytime you want on any of the work that you're doing. Thanks again for being with me.
And thank you for having me. I really enjoyed this. I think it was very important.
Thank you.